This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the women's room where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Alexis Rizo, who is a policy associate for the Community Environmental Council that serves Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo Counties. The CEC advances rapid and equitable solutions to the climate crisis. We're so happy to have you here today, Alexis.
No, thank you for having me. It's a great honor.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I asked Alexis here today to talk about bold climate action and projects that she is working on right now, like building electrification and its impact on the reduction of greenhouse gases. But before we get to that topic, it would be great if you would tell your listener how you came to work on climate change. Yours is an inspiring story.
Yeah, of course. So I was born and raised in Oxnard, California, so I'm very familiar with Ventura County. My grandparents were actually farm workers in Oxnard during the 50s and 60s, and my grandfather actually worked alongside Cesar Chavez, organizing boycotts and rallies in response to labor rights and the exposure of pesticides that was harming the health of farm workers in our community. And so growing up and hearing all of his advocacy stories about all the change and advocacy that he brought forward in our community, it really inspired me in learning about climate justice issues. I decided to study political science and got an emphasis in law and public policy. And so that's kind of how my story came to be, working in environmental policy.
Oh, okay. Well, great story. You've also had a couple of other experiences that helped shape the work you do now, developing policy to work toward climate mitigation. What were they?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I studied political science. I worked in city government for a period of time as well. I also was able to study in Spain and really focused on the political systems of the European Union and the public policies that are there in Europe. And then I also was able to track environmental policy and legislation at the US Senate in DC. And then I found myself at Community Environmental Council as a policy associate working on our policy team, where we advocate for various energy and related policies that, like you mentioned, Kathleen, help rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
And you actually worked for our Senator, Dianne Feinstein.
Yes, I did. Yeah, that was at the Senate. Yep.
Hey, how cool is that?
Yeah, it was really great.
So with all that under your belt, why did you come back to California?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I really enjoyed my time obtaining policy perspectives on the international and the federal level, but I really wanted to work at the local level. And one part of that reasoning is because the local level is where a lot of the innovative work takes place, and it signals to the state and possibly federal government, hey, look, like these policies work. Here's our case study in our region. Let's try to influence state policies to get there. And I also particularly feel lucky that our state of California is one of the leading regions in the world for innovative environmental policy. And we're at the cutting edge of this type of work. So, understanding that perspective as well. And I've also been deeply tied to this work and to push forward this type of work in my community, the same community that my grandfather and others helped advocate for. So I just really hold it near and dear to my heart.
Oh, well, that's really, really neat. And, I think we're all very proud of California being a leader in environmental change. Yeah. So back to the CEC, the Community Environmental Council, and it's been around for quite a while, right?
Yeah, it has since 1970.
Oh, wow. So, 50 some years, that's really good. Mm-hmm. we're in the women's room, so we like to highlight the vital work women do toward climate change mitigation. Now, the CEC is actually directed by a woman. Who is she?
Yeah, so the Community Environmental Council is directed by a woman. Our CEO is Sigrid Wright. And she has been leading the organization for the past 7 years as CEO. And she's has a lot of experience actually working at CC previously as a staffer too. And Sigrid, has worked to transition the region to carbon neutrality through innovative local policies and local programs in hopes to influence state policies. She was actually named Congressional Woman of the Year by Congress member Silvia Carvajal in recognition of the 25 years of climate action leadership that she's brought forward. So we were really excited about that.
Wow. Okay. Well, congratulations to Sigrid Wright. The CEC takes bold climate action. Now, why do we need bold right now? Would you give an example or two of how the nonprofit has taken bold, immediate action?
Yeah, definitely. And I first wanted to address the why now part of your question. We need urgent solutions for climate action that are sustainable and just. Ventura County has heated up more than any other county in the contiguous US.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And also, we're no longer just thinking about climate change. We are literally experiencing climate change, such as, in 2018, our region experienced a climate disaster, which was the Thomas Fire, which is the largest fire in California history, and it's currently the 8th. And so knowing all those things, CEC has been at the front of community-driven approaches to climate action that have actually scaled across the US. And, some of these approaches, I can name a few, are, we helped pioneer the first hazardous waste and curbside recycling programs. We opened the first solarized program and securing the region's first wind farm. We also have successfully advocated for policies, including helping California pass California's recycling law, the first of its kind in 1990. But I also do want to highlight that California's Central Coast has a really extremely diverse ecosystem and experiences the effects of climate change in the form of wildfires, extreme heat, rising sea levels, and also that the communities living here serve as a microcosm for the world with numerous cultural, racial, and linguistic identities, as well as varying socioeconomic inequities and profiles. So we do have an opportunity to serve as Climate Innovation Lab. We're piloting climate action solution with urgency that the planet demands right now.
Right. So we're really an experimental area. So I have some more kudos for the CEC just to, complete your credentials. It was named 2020 California Nonprofit. It was a 2020 City of Santa Barbara Climate Hero and is the recipient of the highest possible ratings from Charity Navigator and GuideStar. Now, many of the projects you and the CEC have worked on or are working on have to do with environmental justice and also health and safety concerns. Could you highlight some of the grassroots programs of the CEC?
Yeah, definitely. Some programs include, for example, CEC co-founded the Central Coast Climate Justice Network, to expand our region's collective power to advance restorative actions and system change, centering on communities who bear the greatest burden of climate change. We have developed a climate resilience plan that was published at the beginning of this year, which is a series of community-driven roundtables gathered around over 15 months that helps synthesize the top community priorities and project ideas regarding to responding to climate change. We have a lot of different programs at Community Environmental Council that focuses on issues such as food security, air quality, mobility, equity, and language justice, to name a few.
That's a big list. So you have worked on also on electric cars and charging station projects. What are some of the programs and policies the CEC has helped develop?
Yeah, so I first want to just take a step back for the listeners and just really speak to why transportation and why dedicate focus to this area. Transportation in California accounts for over 50% of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, which is huge. Knowing this data, it's vitally important to prioritize this sector. And it's great to see that Governor Newsom is setting a course to end sales of gas vehicles by 2035. And the governor's executive order establishes a target for the transportation sector that helps put the state on a path of carbon neutrality by 2045. You also see at the federal level rolling out of funding for electric vehicle infrastructure. And so I just really wanted to set up the scene for our listeners about that. And so at Community Environmental Council, we co-founded the Electric Drive 805 with the 3 air pollution districts of Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, and Ventura counties that helps bring electric vehicle access and education to our region's residents. Community Environmental Council has also worked to provide one-on-one education in English and Spanish for community members interested in adopting electric vehicles, and help provide access to low to moderate level income households gain access to local and state incentives and rebates to help with the purchase or lease of a new or used electric vehicle. In terms of policy, we help develop Ventura County's EV blueprint, and we currently advocate for local jurisdictions to adopt EV action plans as well. And I also want to highlight just the inequities of affording electric vehicles and lack of charging infrastructures, especially in underserved communities and in multifamily developments. And so I just want to also let our listeners know that a focus of our work, along with advocating for electric vehicle adoption, is advocating for multimodal solutions such as public transit and electrifying those sectors, as well as advocating for planning for more walkable and bike-friendly cities.
Right. So who pays for the electricity when someone hooks up to one in a public garage? Does a recipient of the car, how does that work?
Right. Yeah. So the car owner would pay for the electricity and public charging, but it really is crazy to see just the cost difference between hooking up and your battery versus getting gas right now with rising gas prices.
Oh, right.
And that's something that a lot of folks are realizing too right now, is just the vast contrast and differences of that.
Right. So do they do it with a special kind of card or with a regular credit card?
Just the regular credit card, or there's usually you hook up with apps on your phone, and that's how payments are usually done too.
Oh, okay. I don't want to spend too much time because we have quite a lot of questions for you to answer. And I was going to ask you about food waste recycling programs, but I have done a show on that. So let's move on to one that I haven't covered. I thought the water bottle refill stations at schools bottles is a really imaginative way to reduce plastic bottle waste. Now, how many stations have been installed, and do students actually use them?
Yeah, so because 116 school and community water fill stations have been installed in our region as a direct result of Community Environmental Council's waste reduction program. And so kudos to our waste reduction program team, they're awesome. We have actually saved 6 million single-use water bottles from being used from those 116 refill stations. So as you can see, they are being used, and students love them. I know I had some when I was going to school as well. So, and I use those all the time. They're
Wow.
really handy and are being used.
Wow, that's a really impressive number of bottles. So, the climate crisis is here right now. Are individual efforts enough? I would in no way discourage efforts like recycling or water use reduction or energy use reduction and so on, but are they enough alone to curb climate change? Perhaps you could talk a little about how we need to also make a larger impact by influencing policy, which is probably the best way to mitigate climate change. I wonder if you would speak to that.
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at, Kathleen, is why policy rather than put just a main focus on individual efforts. And I agree with you that individual efforts are important, but to also remember that one, data shows that a handful of corporations and sectors are major polluters and are driving the climate emergency that threatens the future of our humanity today. And second, that I personally want to highlight is just an equity lens. We want to make sure that a well thought out intentional plan is developed where BIPOC and underserved communities are not left behind, who have historically taken the brunt of pollution and climate disasters due to environmental racism that are perpetuated in our current systems. And just making sure that funding is being streamlined into these communities.
Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we need to do a station ID and we'll be right back. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the women's room where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Alexis Rizo, who is a policy associate for the Community Environmental Council, serves Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo Counties. The CEC advances rapid and equitable solutions to the climate crisis. So stay tuned to hear about how bold climate action can change policy and have a huge impact on climate change mitigation. And we're back, and you were just explaining the difference between, climate policies and individual effort. Did you have anything more to say about that? I had to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, I was just telling the listeners that data shows that a handful of corporations and sectors are major polluters and are driving the climate emergency that is threatening humanity today. And second, like policies can provide an equity lens. And so I just was highlighting that we want to make sure that a well thought out intentional plan is being developed where BIPOC and underserved communities are not left behind, and that funding is being streamlined into these communities. But I also believe that we are at a very exciting time in our society right now where old systems, are failing us, and we have an opportunity to reimagine the systems that once oppressed to liberate us in a greener, more just society. And so I believe envisioned, innovative, equitable policies can help us get there.
Okay, individuals can't really change the corporations, but getting the policymakers to change policy is a way to do that. Like many climate policies, the push to phase out natural gas in buildings began in California. In 2019, Berkeley became the first city to ban gas hookups in most new homes and buildings, citing climate change. So let's get to building electrification, which, when I first read it, I think, oh, that's kind of dull, but it is not dull at all. It is a project that's going to have a huge impact. So how much do buildings contribute to greenhouse gases because of the use of fossil fuels such as natural gas?
Yeah, so in California, it accounts for about 24% of greenhouse gas emissions in California.
24%, that's quite a lot. So I had no idea how toxic natural gas stoves are. Gas has always been marketed as clean energy, but is it?
So gas is a fossil fuel.
Okay.
Yeah, and there are many studies now that show the health implications of burning natural gas in your home can have, especially to our most vulnerable populations like the elderly and our youngest. Use of gas-fired appliances can mean that levels of carbon monoxide, NOx, and particulate matter indoors can often exceed the acceptable outdoor levels. And studies have also found a linkage between childhood asthma and use of gas stoves.
So I've heard that these gas stoves leak even when not in use. Is this true? And you already mentioned there are health risks, and what some of them are, the asthma. But what about leaking when not in use? I found that quite startling.
Yeah, so studies now show that gas stoves leak significant amounts of methane when they are being ignited and even when they are turned off, which methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. There has been big stories picked up by New York Times and the Boston Globe and others who are broadcasting this more widely, and it is becoming more of a conversation now.
Okay, so the when I first heard about your gas, like I said, but I like my gas stove, and I had always heard that gas was cleaner and better to cook on. But these new electric stoves are not your mother's electric stoves, are you? Are they? Could you just talk a little bit about them?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think in past years, like maybe a decade ago, you would think of an electric stove as those like old coil stoves that heat unevenly and they just are a real big pain. And technologies have improved vastly. And there are induction stoves now, which are awesome. Lots of chefs are actually opting to use induction stoves, and I personally have an electric stove, and I love it. It's flat surface top. It's great. And I also want to highlight, this is the biggest misconception of, the stove, like they're not up to par with gas nowadays. And I just do really want to highlight that, technologies have improved vastly.
Well, that's a really good thing to know. Now, is there cost savings to an all electric dwelling?
Yes. So ordinance benefits of electrification, and I want to highlight for new construction, do not come with a high cost burden. Forgoing gas hookups can actually save thousands of dollars of construction costs, and reports from the California Energy Commission show that all electric buildings across nearly all types of construction cost slightly less than mixed fueled counterparts. There's also momentum in all electric multifamily housing because of the affordability aspect of it too. So there is a cost savings to all electric dwellings.
Okay, so there is a California state law, AB 32, Assembly Bill 32, requiring local cities to reduce their greenhouse gases. Is that correct? And how do you know how much reduction is required and by when?
Yeah, so SB 32 is a California Senate bill, and it is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. SB 32 sets into law to mandate a reduction target in greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below the 19 levels by 2030, as well as an executive order to reach carbon, or the state of California has an executive order to reach carbon neutrality by 2045.
Okay, so that means that local cities have to find ways in their climate action plan to reduce levels. Oh,
That's
okay, so
exactly right, Kathleen.
yeah, so what has to be changed here in Ventura in order to have all new developments, done in electric only?
Yeah, well, the first step in getting buildings converted to all electric, and something that Community Environmental Council has been advocating for is for jurisdictions to adopt an all electric ordinance for new construction. And, we advocated that at the city of Santa Barbara, and they actually passed an all electric ordinance for new construction. And they passed a health and safety ordinance to require new developments in the cities to be all electric with some exemptions. So I just really want to highlight city councils and board of supervisors, if you're talking about a county level, have the authority to implement such an ordinance. And it's been done in California. There are 50 and counting plus jurisdictions in California that have already adopted such a code, and some are in our neighboring cities, such as the city of Ojai, like I mentioned, Santa Barbara. The county of Ventura is actually developing one right now as well. Agora Hills, LA is doing one too. So it's a policy that has momentum right now.
Wow. Okay. Well, that sounds really good. And, I think it's really important to have mentioned ordinances, that is a way that we can take bold climate action by getting our leaders to change the policy. And that's sort of been one of the foci of our interview here. And I do want to, we're almost out of time, but I want to thank you so much, Alexis Rizo, for coming in to tell us about your work with climate change and specifically building electrification and its major reduction in greenhouse gases. And I'd like to thank you all for listening in. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the women's room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good.